Good afternoon and welcome to Lecture 10 of the webinar on Why Does Disability Research Matter? In the previous lecture, we talked about book and books in print, how these are inaccessible to those with blindness and low vision. And therefore the need to transform them into an accessible format for those who are print disabled. Books are not the only thing transformed into an accessible format. For example, this webinar itself, to make it accessible to those with hearing impairment, we have sign language interpreters. Likewise, most events and objects need to be designed in ways that they are accessible to people who do not belong to the normative form of corporeal embodiment. We are extremely privileged and in fact honored to have with us Professor Gregor Strutz from Germany to talk about inclusive and universal designs. Welcome, Gregor. But before I call him onto the platform, it is my great pleasure to welcome back Professor Shilpa Das from the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad, to carry the session forward and introduce Professor Gregor. Shilpa, the platform is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Someshwar, and good afternoon, everybody, especially our guests today, Professor Sati, and our two interpreters, Gargi and Stuti, who through this week have done such an amazing job. So it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome and introduce to you all today Professor Gregor Strutz from Berlin, Germany. Since 2015, he has been teaching both communication design and industrial design students at HTW Berlin, a very popular course named Inclusion and Design. In 2017, he was a visiting professor at NID Bangalore in the area of universal design. But I would like to tell you a little about him. Much before he started his studies in graphic design, he developed a deep friendship once when he was in Norway for a whole year with blind and partially sighted people. And after he returned home to Germany, he was plagued with the question of how people with and without disabilities can be brought together with the means of design. So even as he was a student, he worked on disability for his graduation project. It was a photo documentary named Other Eyes, and it was about the lives of two people with visual impairments in Norway, which was published in 2007 as Germany's first inclusively designed photo book. And then he founded a non-profit association of the same name, which developed the project into an inclusive exhibition, which traveled across Germany. And it traveled to about 15 locations for several years, including various state parliaments in Germany. The Federal Commissioner for the Affairs of Persons with Disabilities in Germany was the patron of the project. In 2015, he founded Inkle.design, which is, and in English translation, it would be called the Agency for Inclusive Design. And their specialization extends to user groups of people with mobility disabilities, people with learning disabilities, and cognitive impairments and sign language speakers. So in addition to the realization of accessible and inclusive design projects, he also advises institutions, museums, and companies on the production of accessible offerings regularly through workshops, lectures, and publications. But I would particularly like to single out a couple of his works here in terms of his work for design offerings for blind and partially sighted people, and for which he has been amply awarded. So one was Germany's first inclusive painting guide called the Golden Age. But more importantly, and the one that really I was struck by in 2018 when Gregor first very generously gifted me a copy, I saw the first inclusive children's design book that he had worked on called The Colorful Gang, which he played a major role in developing. And he and Inkle Design were actually conferred with several awards that year for this particular book. And he won across countries, Canada, Switzerland, Germany, Japan, very notable awards for this. So this particular book is inclusive in the sense that, but I will let Gregor speak about it, that both people who are blind and people who are not blind can read the same book. And it is not segregated in the way we might imagine it to be. So, but I will let him speak about it. So before I hand over to him, just a couple of points. When we look at disability and design for disability, the medical, social, and systems models of disability, which we are familiar with, all take action in very different ways. So the medical model, for example, considers disability as an individual pathological problem. And so it looks for ways to restore the person's functional ability through assistive aids and appliances, prosthetics and orthotics. The social model, which places the onus of disability on society, of course, as we know, urges using products, facilities, services, and environments based on accessible design principles to reduce or remove accessibility barriers. And then it is the systems model that uses universal design as a way to increase accessibility for everyone. And it's a very less stigmatizing model than other approaches. So now, without much brouhaha, I think I will invite Professor Gregor to make this presentation. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation. Thank you for having me. Before I begin, I think I would like to share like 2 or 3 thoughts with you. The one is like you're having this conference and you are talking about design. No, you are talking about disability and research, disability research, and of course also about people with disabilities and the huge topic or the huge like utopia of inclusion. And like as Shilpa already said, we are also working in this field, but we might do it with a different perspective. And this is exactly that we are working on those topics from the perspective of designers. And like we, also my colleagues, we are convinced that design is an important key in order to realize as much as possible of this utopia of inclusion. And yeah, of course, it would be wonderful if all the designers would do that. But however, so far, only like a very, very little part of the creative world of designers are engaged in this area. You in India, you are having this universal design discipline at NID, In fact, in Germany, there is nothing like this existing at all, like as a specialization, like a whole studies program. Like what I want to say with this is that the world of like the designers world is still far too little dealing with these important questions of the future yet. And there is, like for my taste, far too little research done in this area. And there's too little said about design and inclusion yet. And that means also we are all seekers somehow. We are like, also we as designers are doing research. Also we are trying to find our solutions and our processes. And those works that I want to show or to share with you are just one approach. They're not the ultimate solution, because we would have to talk much more about it, and we have to share much more experiences with it. So, and of course, this is my aim. I would like to share my experiences with you without, like we are calling it in German, to eat the knowledge with a spoon. And like this means that you think that you know too much. This is definitely not what I'm like how I see myself. Yeah. So this is the one thing. And the other thing, as Shilpa said, is like I had the wonderful opportunity to be allowed or to be able to come to India, starting in 2014, like all the way up to today, to the present time. Of course, Corona did a break, made a break in it, like in my travelings right now. And as she also said, I was allowed to work in the universal design discipline in Bangalore. And I've also visited a lot of institutions in India which are working with people with disabilities over the years. And like, again, here, what I want to stress out is that I'm totally aware of the fact that the circumstances in between India and Germany are totally different. And it's not about me judging if something is better or worse. That's definitely not my goal, because I understand design actually as a result of communication within a society. And of course, if society is different, then also the solutions will be different. And of course, also other starting points lead to other solutions. So I think, like, talking about design and inclusion, it's most about an attitude. And design for inclusion, like, is a kind of an approach with a special kind of an attitude. And this is exactly what interests me and what always has interested me. So this as a speech before, just to make clear how I'm thinking and where I am. Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen now with you. Hopefully you can see it now. Is it visible? When I'm pressing?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Can you see a picture of me and a lot of Indian students in NID in Bangalore? Yes. So like what I said, that the attitude is something that interests me. There is this one picture that definitely hit me when I was visiting a blind school in Bangalore in 2017. And that was exactly this kind of a self-made solar system. And this is exactly what I mean. If we manage to design with this special kind of an attitude, with something where you're like very, very open-minded and try to find a good solution, then this is the best base to get closer to any kind of achieving inclusion. And this is something what I'm like convinced of that designers should do. There is a strange, now just to define how the current situation in Germany is right now. Germany as a country has fully ratified the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2009. And fully ratified it means that like everything that is claimed in this convention is something that Germany says it wants to achieve. And due to that, a lot of states and institutions are obligated to implement accessibility and inclusion. But unfortunately, however, the reality appears to be totally different still today. And the problem, or like why I'm so like angry about it, is that Germany actually, when we are looking at the statistics of the country, Germany is an extremely rapidly aging society. There is expected that in 2030 we will take over from Japan, being the oldest aged society in the world. And of course, connected to that, we see that there is a sharp increase in the number of people with disabilities is happening. Already nowadays, every seventh citizen in Germany has an officially recognized limitation. And this is very interesting because if we look at the figures and numbers, we do see that, you know, like those softer versions of limitation, the case numbers are very low. So everyone is expecting that actually there is a huge hidden number which is not officially recognized, and probably even more citizens in the country do have any kind of limitation in their life. And also what is important to understand this country here is I'm hearing some noise. Doesn't matter. Okay.
Could everyone please mute their speakers? Requesting everyone to mute their speakers, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. And what is important to understand the situation in Germany is the fact that for us here in this country, 79% of the people with disabilities acquire their limitation during their lifetime. So there's a direct connection in the fact that we are this rapidly aging society, and our like kind of limited society or handicapped society. Of course, a lot of elderly people are having their limitations. And due to that, for example, as a very, very small example, our case numbers of blind readers being able to read Braille is very low. Only 15% of the blind people in Germany are able to read Braille at all. And that, of course, is having a huge impact also in the solutions that we have to come up with as designers. Yeah. So when I'm talking to you, then I'm talking to you as the founder or the manager of a small design agency, which is based in Berlin, which is called Inkel Design. And when I'm standing here talking to you, telling you that I was founding it in 2015, then I don't want to pretend that I'm the only one. Of course, I'm having 10, not of course, but I'm having 10 wonderful colleagues as my as my partners and my employees. We are a design agency which is working in an interdisciplinary way in between graphic designers and product designers. And we have very wonderful and direct collaborations with different architects, audio describers, sign language interpreters, and a lot of other freelancers that are like supporting us in the different areas where we know that we are not the specialists, because every specialist should also know where, you know, like the borders are. We see ourselves as a design studio that works for people with and without disabilities. So our focus has always been to combine people and enabling them to have experiences together. When we are working, we are combining our knowledge for people with reduced mobilities. We are working for blind and partially sighted people. This is like the man with a thumbs up impression, and the other blue square, which is above it. And those are the German signs for easy to read language and plain language. So this is for people with learning disabilities and cognitive limitations. We are also working in the field of sign language. And that is something that might sound funny to you, but to Germany, it has been a huge step forward, understanding that Germany actually is a country where people are migrating to. And this is important because in the past, we were always just focusing on a person who is able to read and to talk German as a first language. And by understanding that we are a country where people are migrating to, we are understanding that also Germans who are having German as a second mother tongue and with their needs are also part of our society. And again, this is directly having an impact on our design solutions that we have to come up with. So yes, this is what we are working with. And when I'm talking about me, my colleagues in our company, then I usually try not to limit the work that we are doing on certain areas. But nevertheless, of course, we do see that like 3 main areas have emerged in our work over the past years. The one are accessible media and books. And with those books, as I heard that you were also talking about accessible books, for example, for blind and partially sighted people, our focus here again is not to come up with a solution that would have been done in the past. I'm not interested in dividing readers into the blind readers who are reading in embossed braille and the partially sighted needing high contrast and everything. My focus is always on coming up with one, like the one for all principle. This one here is a nice example that we, like a project that we finished, I think in last year, spring last year. It is an art book. This art book, Mensch, is called Human. And it was done for a museum which is placed in the west of the country. And this book is like showing 6 art pieces of the museum, but in a very special way, because we are using those art pieces, paintings, and other huge objects in order to tell a story. And the story that we are telling is how the portrayal of humans has changed over the centuries. So we are using, for example, the depiction of Jesus Christ on the cross as a representation of the Middle Ages, where all earthly things were like the representation of all earthly things was forbidden here in Europe, and only Jesus Christ was allowed to be shown. And from there onwards, we are telling all the story and via the Renaissance, where the bourgeoisie and the representation of them is coming up, all the way until the early 1920s, the 50s, where Joseph Beuys and the conceptual art is showing that everything representational is disappearing again. So this is like a huge story. We are using art in order to tell something different. And again, here, we are not only doing something for the blind and partially sighted. Actually, this whole book is meant to be something accessible for people who have like a very low educational limit or level, people who usually would never go into an art gallery because they might think that they are too stupid and that they might not be able to understand those art pieces. So this is the actual goal of it. Another nice example was the one that Shilpa was already talking about, a huge, actually also research project that we were doing over several years for a larger helping organization here in Germany. It is actually a kind of a TV lottery, which is using all the profits it is doing only to help and to support people with disabilities and to change their view in the society. And this organization, which is called Action Mensch, Action Human, is especially working in the field of kids, because they are saying if we want to implement the concept of inclusion into the society, it is smartest to start with the children, because via the children's we will be able to grow up a new kind of a society in the future. The goal or the aim here was to come up with a solution how to tell a story, as Shilpa said, to like a huge and broad variety of different user groups or reading groups of children. We were supposed to come up to do something for blind and partially sighted kids, kids with a migration background, kids with hearing loss, learning difficulties, but also as important as the others, kids with average abilities. And the goal was to tell a story about 5 friends to them in very different ways. We are combining 2 kinds of German, like written German language. The one is the so-called everyday language, and the other one is the easy to read German. We are combining it with Braille. We are having the high contrast design, which is accessible to partially sighted kids. And most important, we're using this easy to read language in order to also reach out to children with learning difficulties. And that has been like the largest challenge in this project, because we had to ensure from the very first day that those kids also with cognitive limitations, are able to find their content within the book, because we didn't want to divide anymore. We didn't want to make a book where the smart kids are reading from the front and the stupid ones have to go to the back and read it backwards. We wanted to mix up everything. The concept is very special. The time won't be enough here to explain it exactly. It is explained at our webpage, and you can find more information over there. Another area where we are working in are wayfinding systems. Again here, because it is a very interesting area. Orientation is causing a lot of difficulties for different user groups. And this is very interesting. Usually, if you are coming up with a very, very good solution, which is accessible, and which is designed in an aesthetical way so that it is not stigmatizing the users, then usually also average users who might find it difficult to read maps or to understand the building, also there would like, or they will love to use it and will benefit from it. Different projects we are doing in this area. This one here is for the Jewish Museum here in Berlin, a very important landmark in the city. It's a very iconic building made or designed by Daniel Liebeskind. It is like the layout is like coming from a broken Star of David, and it is like a huge symbol and a huge room of experience here in this town. It is the largest Jewish museum in Europe, and they wanted to come up with this solution, becoming more accessible for people with disabilities. And we were combining an audio guide with tactile maps and also tactile content, which I will show later on. Again, Jewish Museum here. Another interesting and very challenging project we were doing until last year for 2 years was also a kind of a research project in a very, very sad way. We were talking, we were working for the Dachau concentration camp memorial site. And what you have to know and to understand is that if it comes to the name of the city or the place Dachau here in Germany, then like almost every German knows that Dachau is the synonymous with the cruelties that National Socialism has brought all over Germany. It is a concentration camp. It has been a concentration camp it has been much smaller than Auschwitz was, for example, but it has been one of the most brutal ones, because that was the concentration camp where the Nazis were practicing their cruelties in order to understand and to export all their knowledge to other concentration camps. So this one is today a memorial site. It is the only concentration camp memorial site in Germany which is still having a gas chamber and is still showing it. And by that, of course, there is a lot of vandalism happening at this place. There are a lot of attacks happening each and every day. And we were supposed to come up with a solution which should be officially opened at the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the concentration camp. 2000, it was last year, of course, and here they wanted us to come up with like different solutions that we were combining. We are combining tactile maps, a lot of audio descriptions with tangible objects, and those tangible objects had to be located, to be placed in a way so that they could be hidden in the night because of vandalism. And the most scary situation they could imagine was that someone comes in the night and puts acid on the surfaces of those models, and people from the concentration camp memorial site wouldn't understand it or see it, and that then like people with disabilities come in the morning, touch those objects, and get hurt on their fingers. So the solution that we were doing here or coming up with was foldable tables that were like the surface, the table surface can be flipped, can be turned in the night by 180 degrees, and which can then be closed again so that everything is locked and you can't reach those models in the night. That was a huge challenging project, because in the one hand, we were supposed to come up with this routable solution. On the other hand, we had to ensure that also people, wheelchair users, could easily assess those objects. And by that, we are talking about the area of your knees, so that you can go underneath those tables. And as you can see here on the right, it has become something very complex, where you can open up a lot of areas on the sides in order to enable to rotate the table surfaces. Another nice project working in the field of wayfinding systems is connected to the topic that, if I'm not wrong, you were already talking about today, the Marrakesh Treaty. And the Marrakesh Treaty, which is on the one hand changing everything around the topic of the copyright, but in the same time also enables library to open up to people with disabilities. And this project here is done for, or is still an ongoing project, which is right now in the stage of implementation in the building. It is done for the State Central Library of the city of Hamburg in the northwest of the country, where we are working on the first step, by coming up with an inclusion concept, defining how, for example, the accessibility for people in a wheelchair can be improved, where we are implementing tactile floor indicators and doing a lot of changes in the infrastructure to enable that people with disabilities can reach each and every floor. We are then defining different goals. For example, partially sighted people are supposed to be able to find each and every book within this huge library building, while, for example, for blind users in the future, we want to ensure that they can reach a contact person on each and every level of the building, but of course not reach out to each and every book. But then by getting connected to a contact person, they can get help and they can find space where they can work in silent. We are also putting up a lot of different digital solutions to improve the accessibility and so on. So the goal for this library, as I liked it very much, is that they're saying, even if we are having this huge name of the central library of a state, we want to ensure, or actually we want to become the public living room of this city, the public living room of Hamburg. And the challenge here in this library was, especially in the entrance area, that there is very, very limited space. But, you know, like coming up with the wayfinding solution, you have to give a lot of information in an entrance area. And when you want to do everything tactile, you need a lot of space because it is connected to the size of your hand, of course. So our solution here, and next challenge in a library, you know, like the content of a library is not fixed within this room or within the building. If they are getting a new collection on, I don't know, transport books, they have to move again. So nothing is safe or steady in a building like this. So we had to come up with a solution that enables the client to be up to date each and every day by updating it themselves. And in the same time, we had to come up with a solution that is tactile, which is accessible to all the different user groups in a very, very limited space. The solution that we were coming up with is to come up with like a rotatable cube, which you can, you know, adjust to the different levels of the building. And within on the surface of this cube, we are having different areas. We are combining optical information, which are printed on sheets, with tactile transparent objects which are placed above it, which are representing the infrastructure for blind people in order to reach their contact persons. And we are combining it then by putting different layers on top again. Very interesting product that we came up with, which I like very much. Yes, the last huge area where we are working in is where in cultural institutions, the different needs are combined into one large story that is told. And here again, I'm showing some pictures from the Jewish Museum in Berlin, where we are, for example, then not only we're doing the wayfinding system, but also offering tactile paintings and telling the story on how the Jewish society has developed over the centuries. Or another nice project that we were doing is was the Monument of the Battle of the Nations, which is placed in Leipzig, a city about 200 kilometers to the south of Berlin. And the Battle of the Nations, just to give you this short explanation, was one of the large battles where the European states were fighting against Napoleon. And the Battle of the Nation was like the most important one before he then finally lost his war in Waterloo. And on this place where this Battle of the Nations happened, they were building a huge monument. And this monument, for example, is also an object that we were coming up with as a 3D model, where we are giving an impression of the outer surface of the building, but also the different floor plans within the building. And again, here through smart combinations, we are combining the blind and the partially sighted users with sighted users who are benefiting from this tangible object, which is placed in the entrance area of the monument within their wayfinding system on the different floor levels within the building. Yeah. So, and the nice also, this is an ongoing project, a special exhibition, which is still happening right now on the museum island Schloss Gottorf, which is again in the north of the country, close to the borderline to Denmark, where like we were working with like different blind and partially sighted users on translating 2 huge art pieces into tangible objects. And also here, a very interesting challenge, in my opinion, as a designer. We were dealing with a huge question on how to translate the phenomenon of perspective to born blind people, because this is one of the largest challenges for them to understand that, for example, 2 objects which in natural size are same in size can be represented in different sizes through perspective. And what we were doing here was like developing a model where we are like combining 3 different ways of representing an art piece. On the right-hand side, you have the very, very random tactile painting as it is done sometimes in Germany. And on the other hand, on the left-hand side, you have the representation of the content of the painting with the original glasses that the artist, who is still alive, was giving to us. And like, you know, it is a still life with glasses, water bottle, and a vase. And this one, as a natural representation, is placed on the left. So you have those both huge differences, left and right, and you have this translation in the middle, which is trying to combine both of the ones into something which is then tangible, but also understandable for born blind people. We did test it out with born blind people, and it worked out perfectly well. Yes. So I was talking a lot now. When I'm like sharing my thoughts with you on design and inclusion, and like my observations I was doing in the last years, then I do see that there's something happening over here in Europe. And this is that the earlier barrier-free concepts, the earlier accessible concepts are like relabeled nowadays into an inclusive design, but they are rather accessible than they actually are inclusive. And when I'm trying to explain what I mean by that, then I would say the problem of most of those accessible solutions that are done over here are rather creating an equalization of disadvantages, but they do not allow equal participation. And the equal participation would be exactly what we would need if we are talking about inclusion. Yeah. So, and of course, like showing you, for example, this sign back entrance for a person in a wheelchair into a public building. This is accessible, yes, but this is definitely not inclusive because it is dividing different users. And this is something like trying to reach out to the utopia of inclusion, which we should overcome. And like a very, very nice concept here in order to overcome those challenges is the universal design concept. The universal design concept was like introduced in the 1980s in the US by a person who is called Ron Mace, or was called Ron Mace, someone being in a wheelchair himself. And he was coming up with like 7 principles who should, or yeah, were supposed to help designers to overcome their tunnel view and to understand that a product can be widened to a lot more users if we are like ensuring that something is equitable in use, that it is flexible in use, that it is simple and intuitive, that it is having perceptible information, that it has a tolerance for errors, that it is causing low physical efforts, and of course, size and space for the approach and use is right, to ensure that things can be used by different user groups regardless their abilities. It has been a very, very important step forward in the past, but nevertheless, to me, when I'm thinking of design and inclusion, this is not inclusion yet, because it is like the concept is very important, but it's coming from the perspective of the people with average abilities, but a lot of people with disabilities would need something else and would need much more. And especially there are those user groups, they are already claiming that since the 1970s that nothing should be done about them without them. We should talk together and not about them. And that, of course, is something which is, in my opinion, or in my understanding, still missing in the universal design concept. So, and therefore, I am totally convinced that inclusion in design necessarily requires the inclusion of people with disabilities into a democratic design process. In a design process where also the designer gives up his power, his or her power, in order to level down, and so that we are all getting equal or becoming equal, and we all can ideate together in a democratic way. And like when I'm trying to share how we are approaching or how we are working at Inke with it, then I would say we are usually realizing our projects in 4 phases. The first step is the one where we are meeting people with disabilities, also the client, where we are all mixing up in workshops and where we are in an equal way defining benefits, contents, and solutions of the special service, the special product, or whatever it might be, and where people with and without disabilities are mixing up, are meeting and talking together. Within this, after having done this, done those definitions, the designer can start working. But again, here, the designer is not allowed to do what the designer loves to do. We are not talking about aesthetics yet. We are talking about the fact that the designer first, like a slave, has to transfer the content from those discussions into an accessible form that can be used by all. So within this second phase, we have to ensure that accessibility is proved and that it will work. And first then, when we have reached to this point, then the designer is allowed to do what he loves to do. And so developing an aesthetic form and doing all the things that designers love to do. But in the same time, he or she has to maintain that those accessible parameters are still there, are kept. And then, and this is again something which designers usually don't like to do, we have to meet again, and we have to discuss again in a workshop phase where we are reviewing those drafts, those solutions in an equal way, again through in between people with and without disabilities. This is in a very ideal process, which I like to do, which of course also not always is happening with us because it is very challenging. And at the end also we are just like service persons for our clients. But we do it very, very often, and we have seen in the past that those workshops are unbelievably fruitful and are teaching us, even if we call ourselves specialists, in so many ways that our horizons gets widened and we are understanding the world a little bit better. Because this is exactly what this is dealing with the fact that I might be a specialist in some area of design, but I'm not the specialist of everyday life. And therefore, of course, I have to implement those specialists into my design process. You see here, like the first one was for a museum project where we were like representing, or where we were coming up with solutions about church architecture and how those models can be stored, how large they might be, how they can be represented. This here was kind of a rehearsal or like a prototyping phase on tactile paintings. And yeah, so there are like different situations where we are working like this. So talking about inclusion and design, or talking about inclusive design, that means that we actually have to do much more than just coming up with an accessible solution, because we are trying to reach out not only to people with disabilities, but also to people without disabilities who might not need this service, this product, but which we also want to make keen and wanting to use the same services and products. And here, very, very important, if I might remind you, this is exactly the area where, when we're talking about an aging society in Germany, where everything becomes very interesting, because then we are able to reach out to the elderly woman or the elderly man who might not be disabled yet, but who is already facing challenges in their everyday life. And those persons are usually very, very keen that they are not getting stigmatized. So therefore, we have to combine in an inclusive design the important criteria of accessibility, and we have to combine it with the usability questions on user friendliness and and so on. We are talking about the acceptability of the solution, that it is stigma-free, and also important if we want to reach out to the market, that there is a market acceptance there, and also that the product might be affordable, for example. And the last and most important part, in my opinion, is the joy of use. Our solutions have to have aesthetics, they have to be emotional, because if we are talking, for example, about people with disabilities, and I'm becoming aware of the fact that if I'm buying some sports shoes, me as a person, I can't do it without, like getting a whole lifestyle concept connected to those sneakers, for example, then why shouldn't this also be something people with disabilities are experiencing with those products that are accessible to them? So one example on how we were doing this in the past is like the last project that I want to share with you. It is a museum project we did in the Neanderthal Valley, the Neanderthal Museum, and you might already hear it from the word or from the name. It is a museum on the mankind, on the history of mankind. It is very, very close to the place where the Homo neanderthalensis was found, I think about 200 years ago. And this museum is exactly telling this story on how, how mankind developed from the African savannas to the nowadays life and the presence of today. And this museum is was a very, very special project to us, and also for the inclusive world here in Germany, because it was the very, very first approach here in Germany that a museum said, we want to come up with a solution which is for blind and partially sighted people and for other people with disabilities, which enables them to have an exactly equal experience while visiting this museum than people with average abilities. And not only that, they also wanted to come up with a solution which, would widen up the world of the average visitor by using those accessible and inclusive solutions in the museum. And what we did is that we had to combine translations of the different contents of the museum in an already existing museum layout, we had to find places which were easily accessible in an, as I said, already existing layout that can easily accessed by people in a wheelchair, which can easily be found by, for example, also blind visitors roaming around by themselves. That was also important. And we had to come up based on that, on this kind of a concept, we had to come up with a solution on how to translate the contents of the museum in tangible objects that can be understood and which are aesthetically pleasing to blind visitors. And of course, this was a huge challenge that we were facing, that we were doing in a lot of rounds with focus groups and and so on. Like the outcome of the whole project was that we were installing like a fantastic and very easily to use wayfinding system, like with tactile floor indicators, and we are combining this with a lot of here like the floor indicators with a lot of tangible objects. We were implementing 23 hands-on stations in one building, which is like, it has never been done before. We are showing, I don't know, bones and skulls and tools of people in the Stone Ages. We are like showing also 3D models, a lot of pads and so on. And we are combining all this with a lot of tactile maps again and again and again, which are giving you an overview on the place where you are so that you can easily roam around and find your way. And that was the most important part. We are combining all this with an app, and this app is an inclusive app, and it's providing audio information, orientational information, and is combining all the content into an app game. And this app game, again, is accessible not only to blind and partially sighted people, it is accessible to also people with learning disabilities and so on, because the fantastic solution was that we are like narrowing down every user to a character who is blind himself. And by that, we are, like also taking people with average abilities, people without disabilities on this fantastic journey of experiencing a museum from the perspective of a blind person and a blind visitor. Yeah. We are, like, as I said, we were implementing 23 stations, hands-on stations in the building. Of course, orientation is the most challenging one. Therefore, we are starting with a huge desk where we are giving a lot of overview informations on the architecture, on the different levels of the museum and so on. And from there onwards, the whole story starts. You see those QR codes that Tamara is looking at right now, which are like the starting point of the app game. And from there onwards, the whole journey starts through this building and those 4 million years of the history of mankind. I don't want to talk too much about the content. As you see, it has been very, very important to come up with a solution that fits into the already existing aesthetics of the architecture of the building. We are like giving a lot of different stories. This one is about feet and how the upraised position of the person, how it developed, and how also like the feet itself had to change in order to enable us to walk and not to move on the floor. And then like we're telling a lot of different stories. This one, for example, here is on the Ice Age, which like covered half of Europe on with a huge ice part. Coming from the North Pole, and this station here, for example, is like a tactile station which also works with warm and cold and makes it perceptible. yeah, as I said, tools and bones and everything. Yeah, a lot of different stories that are told. I'm not having a perfect documentation of this project yet, because this project was finished in, I think, in May this year. Like that was the time of the high peak of coronavirus, of the, I think it was the third wave we were facing. I can't remember actually, I'm sorry. It is like the museum is now open to the public, but in a very, very limited way. And we couldn't have any meeting with the whole focus group yet, because we were not allowed to. But a lot of different users from our focus groups have been there on their own in the museum. And like the first reaction was this huge wow they were expressing. So we are looking forward like that, you know, the corona restrictions will be like a little bit lowered down in the future. And then we can meet up again there and can test out everything together. It hasn't been possible yet. Yes. So to make a long story short, all the things that I was talking about, my main message would be that I'm totally convinced that inclusive design is possible and is a very, very interesting concept. But it is only possible to come up with inclusive design solutions if we are succeeding in connecting the aesthetical worlds of people with and without disabilities. And when we are talking about connecting the aesthetical worlds, of course, we have to talk about it and we have to discuss it. And therefore, we have to implement people with disabilities in our design processes in order to come up with new solutions for the future. But I don't only want to, you know, paint a nice, bright painting at the wall of this situation, because there are challenges, a lot of unsolved issues and challenges that we are facing. The one is a very, very problematic one, and this is that actually we have, like as inclusive designers, we have to come up with new production methods that are needed with the focus of reducing the manufacturing costs. Only if we are able to come up with solutions that are not much more expensive than the average solution, first then we will be able to reach out also to other users and to a totally like different market than we are today. This is the one thing. The other thing is talking about the public body, the public services, and speaking about putting things on tenders, public tenders. Here, the current logic of public tenders is a huge problem, because usually it prevents inclusive design. Because in a public tender, usually conditions, elements, and all the goals of a project are already defined. But if we are talking about a democratic design process, we would have to talk about it before anything is put on tender. And this is something that the public bodies and a lot of institutions haven't understood yet. But nevertheless, I am convinced that this will happen. Time will change, and the need in the society will just grow. And this is something that I'm convinced of will happen both in Germany, but also in India in the future. And by that, I would like to use the wonderful German word of Danke, which means thank you for listening to me. And I'm looking forward talking to you and sharing your thoughts.
And to that, I would like to add Professor Strutz, vielen Dank for a fantastic presentation, which means thank you very much for a fantastic presentation in German.
Welcome.
So thank you. And now we invite questions from everybody. We already have a comment from Ahuti Dandukia, who is appreciating what you said about inclusive design, that it should be such that the users don't feel stigmatized while using it. But before we go on to the questions, just a few quick comments from my side. It was truly insightful, Professor Strutz, how you spoke about the way designers are doing research, deploying what is called design thinking in very novel ways through design processes. And because much has been written about design research uh, using methods that are different from the usual ways we understand, research to be. Um, and also, it was an eye opener to know things such as, despite every seventh citizen in Germany having an officially recognized disability and so many people being blind, only 15% of blind people in Germany are able to read in Braille at all. Um, uh, but what one also appreciated is the fact that people in Germany, you said, for whom German is a second mother tongue, how you've tried to even consider inclusion of this kind in your project. So a wonderful array of design projects that you've shared with us today, accessible books, inclusive museum guidebooks, inclusive children's book that caters to children with a broad range of disabilities, wayfinding projects. One has never thought about tactile paintings or tactile building plans and signs. And, these are things that I have always felt to be missing in most museums across the world. So this is very novel and interesting because most museums, in the name of accessibility, simply install ramps and elevators, and they think of the built environment, but they miss out on these kind of elements. So the wonderful projects, the one at the concentration camp with the tactile models and such a simple, clever solution to a very complex, challenging problem. This is what design seeks to do, not, economical at the same time as well. And the rotatable building plan cube in the library at Hamburg, I mean, that is also including the principle of flexibility, which is such a fundamental universal design principle. Yes. To cater for more books coming into the library, into this public living room of Hamburg, as they call it, is, and then again, what an amazing way to translate perspective, in that other example that you gave us. That was really brilliant. And I thought even with the Neanderthal Museum that you, the last of the projects you shared today, how to experience the museum through a blind visitor, and in the process also the use of different senses in that, but also at the same time sensitizing non-blind people and users of the space in the museum to in such a subtle and nuanced way. So wonderful work. And I would just like to say two things actually stay with me from your presentation the most. There are many things, but don't want to consume time from the questions that our other fellow participants have. One is when you spoke about the difference between barrier-free, and you said that barrier-free is not necessarily inclusive. It creates an equalization of disadvantages, but doesn't allow equal participation. I mean, that's a profound statement that I'm going to be reflecting about later today as well. But the one thing that, and it has always been a bone of contention with me vis-a-vis design and design products, is that when you spoke about the joy of use with respect to any design product, besides accessibility, usability, acceptability, and when you spoke about aesthetics and emotionality, because this is usually the one thing that is typically ignored in the work of designers for disability, because lifestyle aspirations is such an important thing, and that is always discounted. So if you could speak a little about the lifestyle aspirations of people with disabilities that designers like you incorporate in your work? And we can also, while you are reflecting on it, we could open the questions if that's okay. So Sharon, Sarah Alex is asking you, what do you think are the main things that can be done to existing architecture, like public or government buildings, to make it more accessible to people with disabilities?
Very difficult to answer because each and every building is its own system. And of course, every system works differently. So I don't think that there is like one simple answer to that, despite of like what I was showing with the solar system in the beginning. If you're having the right attitude and trying to change something, you will achieve a lot with very, very simple solutions. This is the only thing that I can come up with right now, because like, as I said, buildings are so different, and each and every, like not each and every, but a lot of difference need different solutions. So I don't think that there is this one simple solution, then the simple answer of trying to do as good as you can.
Right, thank you. And she's also asking a connected question and asking, what can people without disabilities do to help in the production of design of more inclusive architecture and products? Not necessarily in terms of design, but in general terms.
But again, something that I would like to, I was trying with my whole speech, I was trying to say, let's not talk about them, let's talk with them. This is exactly this kind of question which I would always love to ask them, people with disabilities, because I'm not living with a disability. And again, that would be my most important thing. Trying to meet people, trying to ask them what kind of challenges they are facing, and like what their goals would be, what they would like to achieve in this building, and trying to start to work from there onwards.
Right. Right. So Prashant is asking a question on the models for the museum that you've designed for the keeping the blind in mind. And he's asking, how does one test the effectiveness of the model for the visually impaired? Are they able to tell the sense of scale? And does it add too much cognitive load to memorize the topography of such displays? In terms of feedback that you may have.
Very complex question. I think, first of all, we as sighted people, we have to understand that a tangible tactile object itself doesn't necessarily mean that something becomes accessible to a blind or partially sighted person. This is very important. So our tactile paintings, for example, are always connected to audio descriptions that you can listen to, which are telling you a story. And for example, the model or the painting or whatever it might be is actually just working as a kind of a map, of a tangible map, so to say, which you would look at as a blind person while listening to a very, very good description. So, and by that, for example, the question of scaling things, understanding sizes is a huge and complex thing that is also complex to us, even if we are like, or at least I am sighted as me myself. We know that in our in our understanding of distances, it is much, much easier to understand something which is in front of you than something that is above you. And by that, not even for us, it is easy to understand scaling and so on. So, and then of course it gets much, much more challenging to especially blind people. But again, if you're having a good description, which is, connecting, for example, sizes to like measures which are understandable to blind people, you can achieve a lot. And then this tangible object is just a map to make it easier to understand or to follow like an explanation. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Professor Gregor. Are there other questions that people may like to ask? Any other questions besides appreciative comments?
Yes, ma'am, may I?
Please, Shampa.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir, for this. I mean, this is really marvelous. In spite of being a person with disability myself, I haven't thought of it in this way. I mean, accessibility is not inclusion; it's something more than that. So, this idea is really marvelous to me. And my question, actually, this is not a direct question, but I'm a bit confused of what you have said. But before that, I just want to tell one thing, sir. You have mentioned this idea of inclusion more than once, that it's utopia kind of a thing. So, how long it will take? I mean, in near future, can we expect this utopia to be materialized? This is the first one. And the second one, about which I'm a bit confused, I just cannot grasp the idea. When you have said that, I mean, a museum can be it inclusive for everyone, and a person who is not blind can also experience it through the perspective from the perspective of a blind person. So in this regard, I mean, if this is so, then the person who is not a blind person or not a person with disability, so for them, how much they will be interested in it? I mean, if they come into this kind of museums, so their can they be able to involve in to their? I mean, can they experience or exercise their faculties, sensory faculties, that is to speak, to their fullest? And if this is not so, then somehow it is reducing their experience, their whole experience, getting their whole experience. And in that case, how much they will be, I mean, um, um, they will be able or to involve in this voluntarily, or they will just take it as an experiment. Uh, so this is my second worry. Better to speak this in this way, not a question. So yes, if you please share your views on that.
All right. Very difficult. First, like if I'm getting you right, your question was, when can we expect that the utopia of inclusion is implemented in our everyday life? And of course, this is exactly what is so difficult to answer, because an utopia is an utopia. And my feeling is that the goal, the aim, the target is right, but I like it is a huge discussion which is also happening on conferences here in Europe, if inclusion in itself in 100% will be possible or not. Because as we already as designers see, for example, I was showing books, wonderful, so to say, wonderful inclusive books, but I was having a fantastic discussion with the director of the blind library here in Germany, who is born blind himself, and who says, Gregor, I love your work, but please promise me one thing. Do never go out into the world and tell the world that this is the one future solution of a blind book. because I think we have to understand that inclusion or inclusive products are right and are definitely needed. But in the same time, we also have to accept that there will always be a certain kind of user groups which are having so special needs that the special solution for them is better than the one which is generalizing somehow and which is trying to connect. But this connection means also that everybody has to give up something, you know, and for some personal needs, this something will already be too much. So, and this then, for example, if we are talking about inclusion and as an utopia, and also inclusive design is somehow an utopia, because, for example, if we are looking at the user group of people sitting in a wheelchair or using a wheelchair, and the user group of blind and partially sighted, and you have to know that the average size of a person in Europe is like a little bit higher than the average Indian size of people would be. Then, for example, the need of the height of something, of a representation for the blind is actually higher as a level as the level that people in a wheelchair would need. And by that, again, we are starting the discussion in our focus groups where we are trying to find the best level in between those two different needs, user needs. But by that, again, they have to give up something. Each and everyone has to give up something. So, long story short, I don't think that 100% inclusion will ever be possible, but it is a wonderful target that we all have to try to achieve in order to change a society. This is the one thing. The other thing was like you asking if I was getting you right, if, for example, a sighted person would like to level down to the level of a blind person in order to go through this museum and to experience it. And of course, this is again something which is very difficult to answer because, as we all know, we can't generalize people. Some people might find it unbelievably scary to get blindfolded when they are sighted, and they would never go into this dangerous situation. They would never let go of their ability of being sighted. And others would do it. I think to me important is always when we are like talking about people with like without disabilities, people with average abilities and inclusive products, that by implementing the aesthetics, by implementing this, the joy of use, I want to get them by their curiosity, making them willing to go into this situation, being open to try new things. So this is what I'm trying to achieve, or what we are trying to achieve. And then, but nevertheless, I do think that a lot of people love to love to use tangible objects and are benefiting from it, because we are like, not all of us, but a lot of people are haptic somehow. And in museums, especially, usually you are not allowed to touch anything. So hands-on stations are fantastic. And a lot of kids love to grab it. A lot of elderly people love to use those stations. And by that, exactly the curiosity occurs. Yeah, so like just as a small fun fact, the German word of touching and the German word of understanding is the same, begreifen. And by that you see that a lot of, you know, quite often the learning is somehow connected by grabbing things. And yeah, by that, I do think that a lot of users like to and love to use those offerings, even if they don't need it. But of course, we can't generalize again. Was it somehow explaining?
No, that's much food for thought there. Thank you so much for that very insightful answer. Um, so we have time just for a last question, and I shall also. Saksham Arora has a comment actually. It's not really a question when he's saying that should we borrow from the terminology employed in translation studies that is lost in translation because multiple senses like multiple languages are not completely translatable but an approximation. But Sujata has a question for you, and I think that could be the last question if there are no more. And she's asking, not Sujata, Nandana is asking, could you please talk about the challenges posed by the pandemic to inclusive design?
The challenges, in my opinion, are exactly the same challenges as we all faced. Like we were going into something where we didn't know where it would lead us to, and therefore it was scary to all of us. And like talking about inclusive design, it was limiting down people as for everybody else into staying at home, into not being allowed to meet anymore. We were doing focus group like we were doing as we are doing right now here. We were meeting with blind and partially sighted people via Zoom to talk, like, for example, this Schloss Gottorf one with the perspective. The whole project, the whole focus group work was, there was never produced any tangible object to look at and to test. It was just done by explanation, by describing. And by that, we were getting the feedback of the users and getting the input we needed as designers. So that was limiting us down unbelievably. And but yeah, as like the whole life was limited. What we do see is that already now is that like the need for special materials has totally changed. So for example, in the past, it was totally possible to come up with, for example, a solution where, for example, a mobile tactile map was produced out of paper, cardboard, for example, while today everything has to be made out of plastic so that it can be, cleaned. We do see that a lot of blind people do not like to touch right now objects in museums. They rather want to get the explanations because they don't know what they are touching. So again, people get scared because of an unknown situation. What I do see, what has been fantastic, so to say, what came with the Corona crisis was that a lot of museums opened up for a new concept where they are doing audio tours through the phone. They're inviting for meetings where you can visit a museum without visiting the museum. You are calling the museum, and the museum guide is guiding you through a room with telling you a nice story at the end. Fantastic approach, in my opinion, because this enabled also especially elderly people to join public life without leaving their home, which they might not be able anymore because of limited mobility and so on. So, but at the end, probably the challenge is exactly the same as everywhere else.
Thank you so much, Professor Strutz. And now I think I should hand over to Professor Sati. And that was a truly insightful session. Thank you for so generously sharing your time and your projects with us. Professor Sati.
Thank you, Shilpa, for moderating the sessions with such dexterity and incisive insights into the talk that you have left very little for me to say, or practically nothing. But anyways, I need to thank Professor Strutz for this delightful, and if I may use a politically incorrect word, eye-opening presentation. As one of the participants said, being disabled, even we could not imagine or think about the things that you talked about. Thank you for introducing us to the concepts of inclusive and universal designs. And what was really amazing was how wide-ranging can the idea of design be, from inclusive children books to an inclusive museum. But what really struck me in the course of your talk were two statements. First, accessibility is not inclusive, and then you followed that up with an explanation, because it is stigmatizing. And that made me realize a number of things that were in my subconscious, but I did not have words to express it. For example, when you use a talking smartphone in public, if you don't use your earphone, then the whole world will turn and stare at you. So accessibility can be stigmatizing. And this is something that I was looking for an answer for years. And here you came up with a pat answer. Thank you so much for such a delightful session. And I thank the participants for making this session interactive and engaging. We really hope that you can connect with us in future, Professor Strutz, so that we could extend this discussion and enlarge our mental horizon on the experience of disability. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And with that, Professor Sati, people leave the session, right? And then they join up.
We break and we shall rejoin at 6 p.m. for the final session of the day. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Gargi and Suki. Thank you so much. Thank you.